I will call to order the Plan Commission meeting on June 30th at 5:33. First on the agenda, well, is approval of minutes, but we don't have any minutes to approve for this meeting. We'll approve them at our next one in a few weeks here. And public appearances for non-agenda items. There's no one that's here for something that's not on the agenda, so we'll move past that. Agenda review, I don't think there's any need to change anything around, so we're good on that, so we can just get started on the agenda. First up is a public hearing and consideration of ordinance 2020-0-19. And before I open the public hearing, I know Nathan is here representing the school district, and so I always like to have the applicant kind of explain what's going on, what they're doing before we open it, the public hearing. So Nathan, if you're listening, and I don't see your picture up there, but I know you're on earlier, if you want to explain a little bit about what you want to do, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi to all commission members. We're bringing, or requested staff to bring this forward this evening related to exterior monument sign for the new elementary school for Oregon School District. This was included as a generic note on the site plan information that was reviewed and approved by the city prior, but we at that time did not have specific information related to the exterior sign. So when we brought that information to city staff to go through the sign permit process, they made us aware that there needed to be some adjustments to allow the exterior sign to be included. Know that there is, as part of the ordinance for discussion this evening, there are some height restrictions and overall size restrictions. We are in the process of tweaking our exterior sign related to the elementary building to comply with those sign restrictions, but we are confident that we will be able to comply when we bring back updated information to city staff for the sign permit process.
All right, thank you. Sonia, do you want to provide a staff report first?
So this is an ordinance amendment for Chapter 23, which is our smart code zoning ordinance. Currently, Chapter 23 does not allow monument signs at all. So this amendment would allow for monument signs, but only in civic zones and specific to certain standards. So those are a 6-foot height limitation, that the base of the sign be made of durable materials, which is typically just a masonry type material, and then that landscaping be included around the base of the sign. Smart code as a model code and such, the one that we adopted in general, they don't allow or encourage monument signs, but I did check in with Placemakers, the consultant that helped us write that, and there are a number of communities with smart codes throughout the country that have amended their code in some way, shape, or form to allow monument signs. They gave me one specific example, Homewood, which I believe is in Illinois, and their standards reflect a lot of what we're proposing here with the 6-foot height limitation. The reason that smart code doesn't allow monument signs is because typically your building is going to be right up straight behind the sidewalk and close to the street, just like what we see on East Sherrill Parkway and some of the multifamily buildings that we have developed in Fitchburg right now. But in civic zones, a lot of times that's going to be different. So you'll recall that the Plan Commission specifically approved the Forest Edge Elementary School, and you'll also notice that the way that it's situated on the site is much different than a typical T5 building like on East Sherrill Parkway. So the school building itself is part of a larger site, and it's set back away from the road and away from the sidewalk, and it does have those auto circulation areas in front with the student drop-off and parking lot and things. So it is much more suited to that traditional monument style sign. So we feel comfortable allowing it in this case. We also proposed the height limitation, so I just wanted to go through that. Initially, the school brought us a 12-foot tall sign as a concept, and we are recommending a 6-foot high limitation that comes from the support of Placemakers and their feedback and input on that change, as well as just some experience in Monona Drive. They were trying to encourage that more sort of urban corridor as well, and they actually limited the height of their monument signs to 5 feet, which was very, very tight. So we felt 6 was better to allow that good 1 foot to get a better base of durable materials and landscaping. So that's where we're coming from with the 6-foot height. There is one other point I wanted to add. So the way the ordinance is written in your packet is it would allow the Plan Commission to approve monument signs for civic zones by an administrative waiver, it's called. I'd throw out that I'd also be comfortable allowing staff to approve it administratively after thinking through this more after the packet was published. I just don't think there's really that much of a reason to have the Plan Commission simply rubber stamp something when it's very prescriptive in the code. So it's already needs to be 6-foot height, durable base materials, and for civic zones only. So there's not a lot of other room for interpretation or by the Plan Commission, where I think it could be approved by staff. So if you're interested in making that change, I'd recommend that.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna quick open the public hearing, and so that is open, but I do not have anyone from the public that wants to speak. So seeing no comments, I will close the public hearing and open it up to questions and comments from the people here. Rich?
Yeah, I'm all in favor of having the staff take care or add that in. So would that just be added to the ordinance?
Yeah, I would suggest changing, right now, the language says, I can bring it up on the screen if that's easier. It says the Plan Commission may grant an administrative waiver. I'd suggest changing it to an administrative waiver may allow for the use of a monument sign, and it just removes that specificity about the Plan Commission allowing staff to approve it.
I'm good with that.
And for reference, thinking of the other Oregon schools, I don't believe any of them have a sign that's even 6 feet tall, so it's not anything different really than what the other schools have. Zach?
What other buildings would fall under the civic zone?
I don't know if we have any others that have been approved, but civic buildings that are listed in the SMART code, it says they're buildings generally operated by not-for-profit organizations dedicated to culture, education, religion, government, transit, and municipal or municipal parking.
So it could be like a fire station or a park or I don't know, stuff like that.
City building.
Other questions, comments, or motions?
I'll move approval of ordinance 2020-0-19 as amended with staff approval.
Second.
All right, saying it. All in favor, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. All right. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
All right, going on to the next item, public hearing regarding the proposed amendment of boundaries and project plan for tax incremental District 13. I'm going to open the public hearing quick just because I don't think anyone from the public is here to speak on it. So I will open it right now. Not seeing anyone from the public that wants to speak on this, I'll close the public hearing, but then go to the resolution itself. And I'm not sure if, Greg, you want to speak first, or you want to introduce it, Sonia?
No, you
Or
can
Pat?
go
Or,
right ahead.
all right. Tell us what's going on.
Good evening or good afternoon. What is before you is a proposed amendment to tax incremental district number 13. For some background information, this can be found on page 3 of the project plan. If you want extra hard copies, I do have some available. But this district was created back in 2018 as a mixed-use district. It was initially created to facilitate some expansions associated with the Phoenix Company and then promote some other commercial and mixed-use development within the boundaries of the district. What's before you this evening is a proposed amendment to District Number 13. The amendment accomplishes 2 objectives. First, it adds some territory to the existing boundary of the district. And second, it's updating and amending the eligible project costs that are permitted within District Number 13. So the original project plan had identified about $23.6 million of project costs, which consisted of development incentives and infrastructure projects. This amendment will add an additional $11,550,000 of TID-eligible expenses. In terms of the estimated increment valuation that's projected within the original boundary of the district and the amended boundary of the district, we've worked with staff who's updated some of those valuation projections, and the estimated additional increment value over the 20-year life of the district is about $222 million. So that's the new value that's projected to help pay for some of the eligible project costs. I want to speak to some of the particulars regarding the amendment. First is the parcels that are being added to the territory. On page 7 of the project plan is a map of the boundary of the existing district, and then also shows the parcels that are being added. Parcels 1 through 13 comprise the present value of, or present boundary of TID District number 13, and then all the other parcels, parcel 14 through 30, all are being proposed to be added to the boundary of TID District 13 through this amendment. The majority of the parcels that are being proposed to be added presently have been in TID District number 4. So what will happen is that if these properties become part of TID District number 13, any new value that is built or appreciation that occurs on any of these parcels that are in TID 4 that'll be added to TID 13, all of that new value will now go to TID 13 as opposed to TID 4. That's not expected to limit or hinder the performance of TID 4 at all, because the existing increment value for TID 4 has been sufficient to pay for project costs, and that district's projected to close within a few years. But the majority of these parcels have been in TID 4, would now be brought into TID 13. There's a map on page 8 of the project plan up in the upper right-hand corner with all the numbered parcels. It shows, what's being added to TID 13, and then that area kind of in the dark red, it shows those parcels that are being added that are presently within TID 4. Again, that's the majority of the parcels being added are within TID 4 presently. One of the reasons this amendment is coming forth this evening has to do with compliance with the equalized value test, and that is summarized on page 13 of the project plan. Anytime new territory is being added to an existing district, you take the existing value of that territory being added plus the increment value of all the city's existing TIF districts. And the existing increment value and the value of the territory being added cannot exceed 12% of the city's total equalized value. It's anticipated when the new increment values for all existing TIDs and the city's total equalized value, that gets certified each year by the Department of Revenue. The 1/1/20 values will be certified on August 15th. In discussions with city staff, the expectation is the increment value of existing districts will exceed 12% of the city's total equalized value once those January 1, 2020 values are released by the Department of Revenue. So that would preclude the city from adding territory to any existing districts or creating any new TIF districts without either closing a district or subtracting territory to get under that 12% test. So before those new increment values are certified in August, we're proposing adding the territory and completing this amendment process before the end of July, before those new values are certified and released. Since I mentioned the majority of the value that's being added to TID 13 has already been part of TID number 4, the majority of that value is already incorporated into the TID 4 increment value. So the only new value that's subject to this equalized value test is about $6,500 in property value, so a very nominal amount. So you'll be under that 12% test based on the values as of 1/1/2019. But wanted to just kind of put that into context as to why we're doing this amendment now. It's because it's very likely by mid-August the city would be unable to add this territory. In terms of the project costs that are eligible in the project plan, on page 25, it summarizes all of the original project costs that were included in the project plan. Those remain TID-eligible expenses. It's a little over $23.5 million. By identifying these projects in the project plan, it legally makes them TID-eligible. However, it is not a formal commitment by identifying them in the project plan that the city is agreeing to fund the projects or appropriate funds or approve them in the budget. All the projects still require subsequent approval by the Common Council, and any development incentives that are awarded have to be approved through a development agreement. So the project plan makes them TID eligible. Whether or not they are TID feasible and meet the but-for test is all evaluated on a project-by-project basis once the city implements those costs. In terms of the new projects that are being added to this amendment, those are summarized on page 26. It consists of $750,000 of environmental analysis and remediation, $500,000 for soil, groundwater, and dewatering and other geotechnical work, and then $10 million for additional development incentives, which are anticipated for structured and underground parking, some other sustainability and placemaking amenities. And then finally, there are some infrastructure improvements on East Sherrill Parkway. A portion of those are within just adjacent to the boundary within the half-mile radius. A portion of those are TID eligible, about $500,000. So this amendment adds $11,750,000 of eligible project costs. So the total from the original plan and the amendment is a little over $35.3 million. I mentioned when working with city staff who spoke with some brokers and developers to help project potential increment value within the remaining life of the district. That's summarized on page 28. To date, the DOR has certified a little over $3 million of new increment value. And the remaining columns show by lot some of the projected increment value that could occur based on different land use types. This is a projection, this is an illustration, but this shows the potential for future development and increment value generation within the district. So that's where that approximately $222 million of new increment value comes from. It's projected out and phased in over the remaining life of the district. If that $222 million of value is realized, that would generate about $63.4 million of tax increment revenue to the TIF district over the 20-year life of the district, and that's projected on page 29. Just taking the current tax rate and extrapolating that increment value going forward, that's how much, that's the revenue stream to pay for project costs. There's a cash flow projection on page 30 that just kind of illustrates how project costs could be phased depending on if that increment value of $222 million is realized. Of the project and the cash flow projection, on the far left-hand side, we show all of the revenues. The city retains some of that annual increment to pay for annual administrative costs of the district, administering development agreements, negotiating new development agreements. And then under the expenditures, we show some illustrated development incentives phased in from 2023 through 2027. The project plan gives the city the flexibility to either pay for the infrastructure costs by the city financing those projects through the issuance of debt, or the preferred method is that developers will pay for that infrastructure and they will be reimbursed by the TIF district through what's called a municipal revenue obligation. That's when the city enters into a development agreement where the developer agrees to construct the improvements and the city agrees to reimburse them from tax increment that's generated from that project over a period of time. So here we've illustrated in the cash flow projection that all of the eligible project costs will be paid through a development incentive. The city may choose to finance some of these projects. This is an illustration. As I mentioned, I want to reiterate, the project plan is not a commitment that the city is going to fund all of these projects. The city has a good track record of reviewing each project on a case-by-case basis and making sure increment is sufficient before development incentives or project costs are financed. So we expect the city will continue that practice going forward. But the cash flow illustrates that, those project costs would need to be phased in to match the pace of development. And that's really the key to successful TIF management, is making sure that the investment coincides with increment value that's going to be generated to pay for the costs. But based on a phased approach, if that $222 million of value is realized, the district would be able to close by year 2035, which is a few years ahead of its maximum life. So each year, the city updates its cash flow projections. We present those to the Joint Review Board, which is a five-member panel that consists of the other taxing jurisdictions that review TID performance annually. Anytime development incentives or projects are financed through debt, the cash flow projections are updated and presented to the city before they're making financial commitments. So again, this plan puts the tool in place. Further commitments will be subject to decisions by the Common Council. So in summary, the amendment twofold. add project costs of about $11.5 million to increase the allowable TID expenses within TID 13, and second, to add some additional parcels adjacent to the existing boundary to capture some future development opportunities and allow that increment to be captured within TID 13 to pay for the eligible expenses. So what's before you this evening is a resolution to formally, for the Plan Commission to approve of the amendment. That'll then get, if you decide to approve it, it'll be brought forth to the Common Council later this evening for their consideration. If they decide to proceed, it'll be brought back to the Joint Review Board. They're scheduled to consider it on July 21st, subject to the necessary city approvals. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the project plan amendment.
All right. Or Sonia, is there anything that you'd like to add from a staff report at this time?
Just in terms of procedural, the staff report recommends approval of the Plan Commission resolution, and then as noted, the council will act on their resolution later.
All right. Pat, you want anything?
Thanks, Mayor. I would just add that this amendment was initiated through a potential development on the west side. You'll notice on the west side of the railroad tracks at the corner of Sain and East Sherrill, there's a large property there that a developer has an option on and is planning to redevelop. This site is currently contaminated, as are most of the parcels that, as you proceed south along the west side of the railroad tracks. So it was logical to extend the TID to this area. At the same time, staff got together with yourself, Mayor, and a few elected officials and discussed future commercial economic development opportunities to the north of East Sherrill and to the west of Lacey. That area there is going to be the prime commercial development area for this neighborhood, the uptown neighborhood. And we believe by putting these potential incentives in place and the infrastructure in place, we're going to see some developments come forth in the near future. So that was the impetus for getting this amendment going, and we appreciate all the efforts that these bodies have done to move it along so quickly.
Yeah, and I'd say that kind of triangle pointing down on the far left or far west side of the map is unique in that it's an area that really has been around for a long time and could be redeveloped in Fitchburg that's not on the north side of the city. I think it's one of the unique islands that had been developed a long time ago, and there is some contamination. So there's some challenges to redevelopment as the rest of that gets developed. Do people have questions or comments? Ed?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for Greg first. The first is the 2035 kind of end date for this. Is that an extension of what TID 13 would otherwise have been without the additional dollars?
It was an extension of about a year or so from the original plan, but I think, I think given that this district is only 2 years old, I think, that closure date will likely be honed in more based on the pace of development that comes forward. So with some added cost and some adjustments in the value, it's still comparable to the original plan, but did change slightly.
Okay. And then the second question is, what do we have to do, or at what point do we have to be back in compliance with the 12%? So we presumably won't be as of August 1st. Does that just mean that we can't do any other TIDs until something closes, or we take something out, or do we have to actually do something to get back into compliance?
It'll still allow you to proceed with all the eligible project costs and development and all of your existing plans. All that will really limit you to doing until either a TID district closes or you subtract territory is create a new district or add territory to an existing district. So your ability to continue to implement projects will not be impacted by that at all. It's really more of your ability to create a new district or add territory.
Okay. Thanks. And a couple of questions, probably for Pat. What's the nature of the contamination, and how is it the city is getting stuck with this problem?
The nature of the contamination is mostly on that side of the tracks is petroleum. Those areas have been used for various engine repair, work on machinery, et cetera, over time. The one parcel is actually a petroleum storage tank is on site. That area hasn't been tested, but we're assuming that that area has some level of contamination. Also, with the railroad tracks in close proximity, you're going to have some level of contamination naturally from that and the railroad ties themselves. The property has changed hands several times over the years, so the known contaminant on those individual parcels is, we don't know the cause of it exactly, who owned it when the issue was caused. So there is state funding out there that we will try to get our hands on, in addition to some TIF assistance for redevelopment there.
So the PECFA program, is that applicable to bulk storage?
I don't believe it is for bulk storage, but the ground contamination, that's the program that would be used.
Okay. And the other question that I had was just with regard to the 10 million in development incentives. And so, why are we looking at this now? Why wouldn't those have been expenditures that we would have anticipated when we originally created the TID?
Since the original creation of the TID, the developers in this area have shown the potential opportunity for a large grocer and some additional commercial development. And we believe in order to keep the urban form of the SMART code in this area, it would require some level of some type of structured parking out there. Much of that incentive money would go towards parking structures and/or infrastructure costs associated with the type of development that we're encouraging.
Okay, thanks.
If I can just add one thing, if you don't mind, Pat. In the original project plan, there was about 18 million of development incentives for on-site infrastructure, parking, and some of the underground parking structures as well. So this is in addition to that. So there was an allowance for some of that in the original plan. This just provides more flexibility.
Okay, thanks.
And that's based off of the city kind of requiring development out there to have structured parking versus the big parking lots. And so that's a lot more expensive to do a structured parking, and that's kind of where they're saying, well, it doesn't make sense for us to build this building then if we have to pay an extra $3 million or whatever it is in parking. We just can't make the finances work. So that's where the but-for test comes in for some of these things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Rich.
What was the, Sonia or Pat, what was the original end of life for the TID the first time around? Was that a 17-year TID or?
That's, you're talking about TID 13 prior to the amendment, or TID 4? TID 13?
Yeah.
That was created 3 years ago?
In 2018, it was projected to close around 2034. So, I mean, it's still within that comparable same time period of closing early.
Isn't there a specified time when it has to close?
20 years.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Next, one more question for you guys. Do we have any TIDs closing soon?
We do.
Ones.
We do TID 4, which is the underlying TID both in this area, and that also extends to like Promega and the Tech Park south of here, like off Nobel, that area there. So it's a large TID. TID 4, we're expecting closure of that TID in the next 2 to 3 year period. And then Orchard Point TID is number 6, I believe, 6. So that's the area out by Target, Hy-Vee, and all those improvements that were done in terms of infrastructure to get that commercial development out there, and that should close around the same time as 4. We are keeping both those TIDs open for one additional year because you can use the increment generated in the extra year to pay for housing within the community. So the council at this point in time is looking to go that direction. They'll have to do a resolution in the last year of those TIDs prior to closure to extend it 1 year, but that looks like the direction we're going at this point in time.
Other questions at all? Yeah, Stephen.
You said that given what you expect from calculations that we would be over the 12%, do you know how much over we're anticipating to be?
Not yet. I think we'll kind of be actually taking a closer look at that over the next couple of weeks as we kind of take a look at some of the new assessment values that were reported to the DOR. So we'll know for certain on August 1st when the preliminary values come out, and then they get certified on August 15th.
And are there any risks associated with being over that 12%?
The only risk is that once you're over the 12%, you can't create a new district without either subtracting territory from an existing district or closing a district. So it's really going to prohibit the ability to create a new TID or add territory to an existing district without a closure or subtraction to get under the 12% amount.
But otherwise, nothing to do with the overall, I guess, tax funding or?
Correct. Yeah, there's no implication on that at all. It's really about the amount of value that can be added or new districts that can be created. It doesn't impact your ability to finance or proceed with any of the projects that are in your existing project plans.
And with the next closing in 2 to 3 years, I would guess that if a big project came forward, it'd probably take 2 or 3 years anyway for that to happen at this point. If they came in tomorrow, it's not like they're gonna need a new TID in December or something like that. They're not gonna be building that quickly. So if it was more than 2 or 3 years, then I think there'd be a lot more concern that, oh, wow, we're gonna be stuck for a long time and we wanna do more projects. But
I'm trying to think how many TIDs have come through in the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm thinking Phoenix was one, but have there been any other ones? I mean, just as a...
Yeah, in the last 5 years, I believe the first TID was number 9. I started 5 years ago. Number 9 was the first TID I worked on, which was the Sub-Zero TID. And so there's been 4 over 5 years. I'm sorry, five over.
Few minor changes, but only
Yeah.
a couple of big
Yeah.
things. Go ahead, Rick.
I am kind of worried because I'd hate to see some opportunity come knocking on the door and we have to turn them away. But then on the other hand, I'm very supportive of this, so I don't know.
If there is a big project that we really want, there is the option, like Greg mentioned, to take property out of a TID early. And so that's, something we can look at doing if there is a project that we really want to do. So there's some flexibility there. It's just, you just got to do a bunch of special meetings like this and making sure it's worth it.
Well, and this is where we've got our big investment too. So, I mean, it probably makes sense to focus on, on this part of the city with the TID money that, we've got available. I was listening in on a webinar earlier today, and there's just discussion of trends in commercial real estate, multifamily, and office space. And it is trending a little bit away from urban areas and toward more suburban areas. And this was even before COVID came, so this may even accelerate it a bit, but it does seem like we should have a good opportunity in the near future. And Mike, you're probably on top of that too, but we may have some nice opportunities for this area because the big thing is the amenities. We really are going to have amenities to attract suburban office and, and balance out the apartments that have been going up as well too, so.
And if you have the project plan on page 13, you'll see that there's currently $353 million in the various TIDs in the city, and 215 of that are in TID 4, which is closing in 2 to 3 years. So once that closes, we're going to have some capacity. Yeah, it's 2/3 of it almost.
Yeah, actually, both of our most successful TIDs will be the ones closing. The Orchard Point and TID 4 have been most successful.
Anything else? Okay.
I have a question for you in reference to what you've seen in contaminants. If we don't get a grant or you don't get a grant, that can go out of sight, I think. What's your experience? What have you seen in reference to that? I mean, obviously, it's to clean it up, but that can get out of hand. What's your thought on that in reference to it?
I think on this particular site, much of the contamination, there will be some areas that we need to clean it up. Other areas would be capped with either the building or the surface parking. So the contamination would not be disturbed in most of the locations. So that's why we believe this development would be good for this site. There would be some money needed. I believe we have $750,000 in there for cleanup of contamination, but it wouldn't be like anything that would halt the project from development.
Anything else? See none. If someone wants to do a motion, that'd be great. I think we have to do 2 motions. It looks like there's a resolution.
It's just the Plan Commission resolution.
Okay. Okay, great.
Make a motion to approve PCR 0420. That's one.
Yep. Here a second?
Second.
All right, second by Ed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed, nay. All right, that is approved. All right, thank you. And Sonia, any report?
Next meeting's July 21st. We do have 7 applications. Some of the bigger ones are the proposed Meyer development on the west side of town. We have the comprehensive development plan, which covers the Wingra quarry land holdings out there. We also have the reapproval of the One Neck expansion in this area of town. The solar farm at Lacey and Seminole is requesting an amendment to their approved plans just to increase the height of the solar panels by 3 feet from 12 feet to 15. And we also have the Lot 10 Orchard Point amendment that we talked about earlier this month. So that's some of the bigger applications.
All right, any announcements? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Second? All right, second by Zach. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 And opposed, nay. All right, thank you, everyone. See you in 3 weeks.